Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Looks like the internet is not popular today, judging from how many people are in the room. India has bigger problems with the lack of cash. For once, being on the internet is not the priority. Thank you to the IDFC team for inviting me to be here today. You know, what I thought I'd do is I'll just spend 15 minutes or so, talk a little bit about the state of the internet in India, what we're seeing as the big trends, and then I thought it'd be much more productive to open it up for questions that you all might have about what's going on in the internet space in India. So it's a very exciting time in India for the internet industry. We are now over 350 million internet users, and the pace of growth continues at the trajectory that we've seen over the last several years. I'm sure last week, this week, and for the next couple of weeks, the growth will slow down, primarily because smartphone sales seem to have been impacted by the demonetization, but hopefully we'll get over that and get back to growth. So 350 million internet users basically makes India the second largest internet user market in the world. It became, it surpassed the US in terms of total number of monthly active internet users earlier this year. And at the current pace of growth, sometime towards the end of 2020 or so, we will have over 500 million internet users in India, right? So at this point, there's very little that can stop that from happening. And the only real question is, what kind of phones will they use, meaning, how high-end or low-end or mid-end, and how much data are they going to consume, and then how will these users impact traditional industries, and also what kinds of new businesses might emerge as we see 500 million Indians very active on the internet. Now let me spend a minute or two to give you a little more flavor of these users, especially the mobilely connected, the users who are connected on mobile, right? So 350 million users, over 200 million of them connect to the internet on smartphones. And to give you a sense how rapid this change has been, I joined Google about 6 years ago, and when I joined Google in India, we had less than 10 million connected smartphone users. So we've gone from 10 million to over 200 million over the last 5-6 years. But even more interesting than that is the smartphone users who connect to the internet every single day. So a metric that we use, which is called daily active users. So about 4 months ago, actually before the launch of Reliance Jio, India crossed 100 million daily active users on smartphones, right? So this is not all internet users, because by the way, we still have about 60-70 million internet users that access the internet on feature phones, and then we still have quite a number of Indians who access the internet only through a desktop device, usually a shared desktop device, either at internet cafes or through work. So 100 million daily active users on smartphones, and actually that is very, very significant scale, right? There are only 2 countries in the world that have more than 100 million daily connected users, obviously China and the US. And over the last 3 months, since the launch of Jio, we've seen the growth of daily active users accelerate very significantly. And I'll talk more about what Jio has done over the last couple of months and what we think is going to happen over the next year or two. Now, there are a couple of important things about these 100 million daily active users. And we like looking at these 100 million daily active users is because those users show us what could happen when India continues to grow, continues to become better connected, and as the ecosystem sort of evolves, right? Most of these 100 million users also connect to the internet on Wi-Fi, right? So they connect on the smartphones, they're active every single day. They spend about 3 hours a day on their smartphones, and they check the internet or they connect to the internet about 165 times a day. By the way, I don't know how many of you measure your personal internet activity. I bet you every single one of you or most of you, I'm looking around the room, you probably check the internet more than 165 times a day. I'm on the internet about 700 times a day. In fact, while I'm speaking to you, I'm connected a few times. I'm just kidding. I'm trying to get Rajan's avatar to actually speak to you. Obviously, almost all of them connect on a 3G connection, and few of them now connect on 4G connections. They consume about 600 MB a month on mobile data, okay? And a lot of people talk about this. That's actually not a lot of data. 600 MB a month is a lot of data. What everybody misses is two important facts. One, because most of them are on Wi-Fi, their consumption on Wi-Fi is about 10 times higher, okay? 8 to 10 times higher. So if you include mobile data and Wi-Fi, the consumption per month is more like 5 GB a month, okay? And then the other thing that everybody misses is that India today is the world's first and largest offline internet. What do I mean by that? Everybody who's on the internet spends more time on apps offline than they do online. And I'll talk more about that. The reason, by the way, is affordability reasons, right? We're acutely aware of our data costs, and because of data costs, we tend to spend a lot more time offline. Every single new internet company that is being launched in India today is designing apps that work offline first and then online, because the Indian user has this habit to actually consume a large amount of content offline. So if you look at online and offline, you're looking at 100 million users who are connecting to the internet every single day and who are consuming effectively over 10 GB of data, 5 GB of real data on mobile internet and Wi-Fi, and then more than that consumption offline, right? So this is actually a massive amount of consumption that is already beginning to happen before the advent of Jio and 4G. And what you can imagine will happen with 4G is significant acceleration of all of this. So that's sort of where we are with these 100 million active users in an ecosystem of about 350 million internet users. Next, now move to the single biggest constraint we've had in the Indian internet ecosystem until September 5th of this year was broadband. We were basically the second largest internet nation in the world with the slowest speeds of the world. So I call it, we had the world's largest narrowband nation. Most countries want to be a broadband nation. We were a narrowband nation. Well, that started to change with the launch of Jio. I don't know how many of you track the telecom sector, but as per Jio's latest public statements, there are close to 40 million subscribers. What is interesting about these subscribers is, obviously, by the way, anything that is free in India works at scale. I mean, you give anything away for free, you'll find that, you just can't supply enough of it, and it's picked up, right? Good and bad news if you're a publicly traded company that has to have income. What is interesting about these 40 million subscribers is they consume about 40 to 50 times the amount of data that an average paid 3G subscriber does in India, okay? So the consumption is just off the charts. I mean, it's just way off the charts. Let me tell you something. We have never seen anything like it in the history of the internet anywhere in the world. Every curve, which was like this, is now like this. Every curve, right? Because you can imagine what 35, 40 million consumers who are consuming 50 times as much as, let's say, the 3G users can actually do to any product. The impact has been especially acute on video-focused products. Think YouTube, Hotstar, Woot, and so on. What it's also done, though, is it's really impacted the other carriers in a couple of different ways, right? One, they've started upgrading their networks. So through our products, we're able to measure the quality of different networks in different geographies and so on and so forth. And we have seen a significant change in the quality of service in many geographies across most carriers. And second, as all of you know, they've also started dropping prices, right, trying to match what Reliance's prices would possibly be in January as they've announced. And all of that is leading to not just the growth of the Jio subscriber base, but really a lift in the consumption of like every other network. Now, in terms of how does it impact revenue and earnings, you all study those things. I don't look at those. I guess you'll know next quarter when they all announce earnings how it might have impacted the other carriers. Now, when Jio does start charging their customers, we obviously expect the consumption to come down dramatically. Meaning per user, if let's say they do charge 50 rupees a GB, and a consumer is going to pay, let's say, 200 rupees for voice and data, you're looking at 3 to 4 GB, right? Which is 5 times current 3G usage, not 50 times. So the consumption per user will clearly come down pretty significantly. And we expect also that the total number of subscribers will come down somewhat, because when you have a free product that you take to charging, you know, you will see a shift of that. So that will happen. But despite that being said, I mean, our belief is that by end of 2017, the ecosystem at a minimum will have over 100 million 4G subs across all carriers. And 3G, which is now at about 140, 145 million subscribers, will probably get to maybe 200 million. So there is a scenario where India goes from having no broadband, because although we've had 145 million 3G subscribers, you know, I'm looking around the room, most of you live in India, I assume. You all know that our 3G has never really been 3G, sort of like 2G most of the time, and sometimes it's no G. I do think that's going to change, and there is a pretty likelihood that over the next 12 to 18 months, we could have 300 million subscribers, mobile subscribers, who will really be on true broadband, right? And the impact of that on the internet ecosystem is going to be very, very significant. The other interesting thing that's happening is, unlike in the US or even China, where you've had different eras of internet business models emerge at different periods of time, right? If you go back to the US, you know, you had Internet 1.0, which was companies like Yahoo, Amazon went public in 97, Google was launched in 1999, so that's 1.0. Then 2.0 was really mobile social video. Companies like Facebook, companies, you know, like YouTube, Apple phones, you know, Android, that was around 2004, 2005, and now we're beginning to see the next big wave. In India, what we're seeing is all of these waves are happening at the same time, right? E-commerce didn't exist 8, 9 years ago. It's actually growing very rapidly. If you look at local businesses, didn't exist a few years ago. Content businesses didn't exist. So all these businesses are emerging at the same time. So fintech, which is really a Web 3.0 era business model, right? You look at sort of fintech in the US, you look at fintech in China. You know, it's really after about 2009, 2010 that these businesses started emerging and really started scaling about 2 years ago outside India. Fintech is also beginning to happen at scale. And I'm sure those of you that look at, you know, that cover, invest in banks, you know, I'm sure you track Paytm. You know, the growth of Paytm has been absolutely staggering. And just in the last week, actually, they've almost doubled their user base. And why? Obviously, when you don't have cash, then you have an, you have a tendency to go and use wallets. How many of you, by the way, use a Paytm wallet? That's amazing, right? How many of you started using your Paytm wallet in the last week? Oh, only one of you. The rest of you must invest in banks, so you're doing, trying to understand how the wallet business works. So we've seen that. And my view, though, is although we're seeing these businesses emerge, the second point I want to make is we are still very, very early when it comes to monetizing the internet. So India is an interesting story, right? You have a large number of internet users, but when it comes to monetization, it's still very, very early. And a lot of people like to compare India and China, which I think is actually a pointless comparison. We should not compare India and China. The only thing similar is roughly the population, 1.3 billion people each. Everywhere else, it's completely different. And when it comes to monetization, there cannot be as different as they are. So let me give you 2 important data points. E-commerce in India last year was $10 billion, okay? This is gross merchandise value. E-commerce in China was $500 billion, okay? China's Singles Day was last week. China's Singles Day, Alibaba did more revenue in one day than the entire Indian e-commerce industry will do all of this year. Okay, one data point. Let's take another interesting data point. The digital advertising market. Last year, India's digital advertising market was $1 billion. China's digital advertising market last year was $25 billion. Okay? This year, India's digital advertising market, 2016, will go from 1 billion to maybe 1.3 billion. China's digital advertising market will go from 25 billion to 30 billion. So, not comparable. Will never be. Maybe in your lifetime. You know, you're a younger guy than I am. But not in my lifetime, okay? So it's still very early, and a lot of people are quite surprised by this. Actually, you shouldn't be surprised, because the thing that drives the size of industries, especially in our business when it comes to monetization, is disposable income. Right? How do you make money on the internet? There are three ways you make money on the internet. From a consumer internet business model. E-commerce, people buy stuff. Advertising, digital advertising. That's actually a function, by the way, of the overall advertising industry. India, despite having a 1.3 billion person population and a 2 trillion economy, actually our entire ad market is only $8.5 billion. Why? Because most people can't afford to buy anything. And now they have no cash even for us to buy anything. You know? So advertising, and the third one is consumer paid, right? So consumers pay for things like gaming and so on and so forth. So actually the reason it's still very, very early when it comes to monetization is because India's GDP per capita at barely 2,000 is about half of where an e-commerce tipping point happens, right? So if you talk to Joe Tsai or Jack Ma at Alibaba, they would say that e-commerce tips in a country, tipping point, where it really goes into hyper acceleration, is at about $4,000 per capita, which is what they saw in China. You know, I was just with Joe Tsai, and he was saying, hey, look, 2009, Alibaba's GMV went up $50 billion 1 year. That year, you know, China's GDP per capita was about $3,900. So we are at about, you know, we are many years away, right? So even at 7-8% growth, you're looking at 8-9 years before we actually get to $4,000 per capita. So what does that mean? That means that it's very, very early. And by the way, the same thing applies whether you look at e-commerce, whether you look at advertising, whether you look at digital advertising, or you look at consumer paid subscription services, right? It's still very, very early. And what it means is India is, for some period to come, when you look at consumer internet in India, is going to be a country of very large user bases and reasonably small addressable markets. Right? And this is actually pretty important to keep in mind, because even when you look at, you know, my business here, you know, relative to the user base that I have on, let's say, Android or search or YouTube, etc., you know, my revenues are actually not where they should be. And you know, it's going to grow. It's growing very nicely. But it's going to be a long time before the addressable markets get to be very large. So what it means really for internet companies like ourselves or startups that are building companies in India is that you really need to have a very long-term horizon. Because at some point, much like on the user side, our market has tipped. On the monetization side, the market will tip, but it's going to take time. And it's going to take time simply because it's tied to GDP per capita, right? So that's really the monetization point. The last thing I'd like to sort of end with is, what is it going to take for us to get, let's say, not just the next 2 to 300 million users online, right? Because that's going to happen. I mean, going from 350 to 500, that's going to happen, right? But as Google, for instance, our mission is to connect 1 billion Indians, right? We want to get all of India online. And I thought I'd just end with, what is that really going to take? Because actually that's where it gets very, very interesting, right? So we have to really address 3 fundamental challenges, okay? There are 4. One of them we can't address directly. I'll talk about all 4. The first one is affordable devices, okay? Today you can buy actually a reasonably high quality smartphone for about 6,000 rupees. And for 3,000 rupees you can get an okay smartphone. It's not very high quality. See, the problem is 3,000 rupees for most of India, as all of you know, is still a lot of money. That's you know, $45. $45 for most of India is a lot of money, right? Beyond the, if you go beyond the 200-300 million Indians, $45 is a lot of money for anything. So we need to have affordable devices. In the 3rd quarter, we are in the 4th quarter, calendar quarter. Indian quarter, we are in the 3rd quarter, but calendar quarters. In the 3rd quarter in India, there were more feature phones shipped than smartphones. Amazing stat. Why is that? Because the average feature phone price is 800 rupees, and the average smartphone price is 7,000 rupees. Okay? So there you go. Right? It's all about price. So essentially, the first big issue that we need to, as an ecosystem, solve is much more affordable smartphones. So I don't know how many of you read, Reliance has said they're going to launch a 1,000 rupee smart feature phone. I think it's a brilliant move, because those are the kinds of things that are going to be required if you really want to get 1 billion Indians to actually connect through a smart or a somewhat smart type phone, right? So that's a big focus area. Obviously, Android is our operating system, and we're working with the ecosystem to figure out how can we actually continue to bring the price of quality smartphones down even more. The second big thing is languages. Only about 200 million Indians are proficient in English. Today, in Hindi and all the dialects of, most of the dialects of Hindi, the internet is useful. 2 years ago, it was not. How many of you have tried Hindi voice speech? Have you tried a Hindi search? Then do a search, you can do a voice search, right? So today, actually, the keyboards work in Hindi, voice works, it all, so everything kind of works, right? Today, the Android keyboard is available in 11 languages. But the reality, as all of you know, is if you really want to cover 1 billion Indians, it's dozens of languages with hundreds of dialects. So we need to solve languages, right? Access, open source fonts, keyboards, voice recognition, and most importantly, we need to get a lot more content online. Today, the growth of the non-English internet in India is orders of magnitude higher. I'll give you 2 interesting data points. Non-English search queries in India are growing 10 times faster than English search queries. Why? Because every single Indian that's coming on the internet today is not proficient in English. They're not searching or they're not doing anything in English. Non-English content consumption on the Indian internet is 5 times bigger than English content consumption, right? So we have to make the local, what I call the Indian language internet happen. And it's actually very complex. So that's the second big thing that needs to happen if we want to get 1 billion Indians online. The third thing we have to do is we have to build use cases or products and services on the internet that are going to be relevant, much more relevant to 1 billion Indians, right? So one of the things we've tried to understand, we have this initiative called Internet Sati, where we go into villages and we do village-level activation to get women in rural India online. Only 1 out of 10 internet users in rural India is a woman, right? So it's our gender gap when it comes to the internet is actually much more severe than any other country in the world. Lots of reasons for that. They don't think the internet is for them, and so on and so forth. So we actually launched this whole ground-level activation program. We are now at 40,000 villages. We've trained 2.5 million women and so on. But one of the biggest finding that we've had is, if you really want to get women in rural India online, and it applies to men as well in rural India, they have to actually see, we have to have products and services that helps them make more money, that improve their life tomorrow, right? Because they're not as interested in messaging. I mean, they'll do messaging as long as it's going to help them with something that they can make money with, right? Selling products, getting more information, etc. So weather, killer app. Why? Because if you know the weather, you know exactly when to harvest, you know what to plant, so on and so forth. Agricultural practices, right? Government schemes, huge appetite to know what government schemes are. Things like this. So we need to build, and by the way, those are not the kind of products that the Western world, thinks are killer apps, but are going to be killer apps here, right? And today, very few developers are actually focused on these types of products. And then the last thing, obviously, we need to, as an ecosystem, and this is not something that Google can impact directly, is we need to have much more affordable broadband. I think we are super excited about what Jio is doing in terms of the 50 rupees per GB. We'll have to see how far that can get us. But if we really want to get 1 billion Indians, spending 3 hours a day on the internet, we need to actually make data even more affordable. And one of the things we are pushing is actually Wi-Fi. So we partnered with the Indian Railways, we partnered with RailTel to actually provide very high-speed public Wi-Fi in the Indian railway stations. We started at the beginning of this year. We are now in 73 stations. We'll get to 100 stations this year and 400 stations from now. The results of this have been staggering. We have 4.5 million Indians, 4.5 million Indians that access the Google RailTel Wi-Fi network every month. They consume about 20 times more data, just when they're transiting through railway stations, by the way, than the average 3G user in India. And every day, 15,000 Indians access the internet for the very first time through our railway Wi-Fi network. And we're only at 73 stations. So you can imagine when we get to 100 by the end of this year and 400 stations by 2018, the impact on, we could have a large number of Indians accessing high-speed public Wi-Fi networks for free. So Wi-Fi is going to play a very big role. So we'll have to see 4G, Wi-Fi, next generation technologies, but all of this stuff put together, we'll need to see access become a lot more pervasive and also a lot more affordable. So these are really the 4 big building blocks that we will need if we really are going to be successful in getting 1 billion Indians online. Thank you.
Can we throw the floor open for Q&A, please?
Yeah, this question
Thanks for the wonderful data points. I'm Ronak Konka with PPFS Mutual Fund. Could I understand from you what are the data points regarding the advertising spend on video in India and the growth as compared to what you see in the West or other developed markets?
Yeah. Look, let's start with the overall media market, okay, the advertising market. Last year was 8.5 billion. Digital was about 1 billion. Right? And you can assume that maybe 10-15% was online video. Okay? Overall ad market is growing at 10-12%. Digital is growing at 30-35%. Online video is probably growing at 75-80%. It's still very, very small. Television is about 3.5 billion, right? So if you look at it, television is about 3.5 billion. Online television is growing at about 15%, let's say, 12-15%. Online video, let's say, is 100-150 million, growing at 75%. So much, much smaller base, growing much faster, but got a long headroom.
Could you also please share the experience of how the ads are being consumed on the mobile device, smartphone screens for video?
Massive consumption, right? I mean, the reason is because, look, you have to understand that most Indians access the internet through a mobile device. So most Indians consume everything on their mobile device. So it's massive. Yeah, there's a question back there.
Hi. Just wanted to know, so if you look at large companies in the internet space like Google or Facebook or anybody with large captive audience, their primary business model is based on advertisement. So I just wanted to understand, it's a very, very basic question maybe, but just wanted to understand what is the ultimate end game? How would you're spending so much of money taking so much of initiatives and stuff like that. How would you ultimately monetize this whole captive audience that you all have?
Yeah, so if you look at a company like Google, most of our revenue, as you said, rightly said, comes from advertising. We have other businesses. We have a cloud business that's, very large globally, growing very fast. We have a hardware business that's reasonably sizable, growing very fast. And then outside of Google, we have alphabet companies, right? When it comes to India, look, our goal in India, right, is, so first of all, you have to keep in mind, we have a very long-term horizon, right, as a company in general, in India especially. And our goal really is to figure out how we can connect all of India, right? So how do we go from 350 million users to 500 million to 750 to 1 billion? That's probably going to take a decade. And then second, as I said, as time goes by, as income levels go up, every addressable market is going to increase, right? And at some point, so my hypothesis, by the way, is that sometime between 20 and 2025 is when you're going to see a massive inflection point, right? It's hard to say exactly when it's going to happen, as all of you know. But when that happens, you'll sort of start seeing quantum jumps in the digital ad market, in the e-commerce market, and so on and so forth. And then that's when, businesses also will become very large. So there's no real... So I guess what, our view is very simple, right? If you don't have people on the internet, you have no business. If you have a large number of people on the internet and you have a long-term view, that's actually a pretty good bet to make. So that's sort of how we think about it. And as a mission, we are very focused on, connecting the world and making sure the world's information is available to everyone. So we've got a very long-term horizon that we're taking when it comes to markets like India.
Sure, thanks.
There's a question here. Two questions here.
Yeah. Just on, given the Android penetration in India, and specifically lack of larger hyperlocal players in India beyond top 5-6 cities, do you think Google's ability to monetize its hyperlocal becomes pretty high in India? And what is the plan there, and how are you approaching it? Because
sorry, what's the question about hyperlocal?
The ability to monetize the hyperlocal listings,
yeah,
given the location-based search, which is driven, and Google's Android penetration is significantly higher in India. So, do you think hyperlocal search and ability to monetize for Google is quite high, and how are you looking at that as an entire area, especially listing?
Yeah, look, I think, whether it's hyperlocal listings or any other form of advertising, right? The reality is the market is small, right? And the market is going to grow, you know, at the rate it's going to grow, right? So even if you grow a small market, and by the way, when I say small, I mean $1 billion, I suppose it's not small, but in the grand scheme of things, it's sort of small, right? For the total digital ad market last year, right? That includes hyperlocal, that includes video, that includes mobile, and all that kind of stuff. So my view is, look, I mean, it's going to grow, but, you know, it hasn't hit that tipping point yet. And the reason it hasn't hit the tipping point, it all comes down to the simple thing. It's income per capita, okay? There are more restaurants in New York City than all of India. That's a fact. Okay, so, okay, what does that mean? And by the way, the restaurant ARPU in New York is much higher too, right? So you take more restaurants in New York than all of India, you take much higher revenue per restaurant, revenue per table. In New York, all of a sudden you're looking at basically a restaurants listing market. In India, that's actually tiny. And the same thing applies across every single vertical. So our view is, look, whether it's Just Dial, whether it's Zomato, whether it's a lot of the other companies that are trying to do hyperlocal listings, whether it's Google, right? It's very, very early. It's very early, right? And I mean, you know, we are monetizing that just as well as we are monetizing lots of other things. But, you know, it's sort of like saying, look, my view is a lot of companies are trying to do this. A lot of companies, analysts, investors are trying to call an end game in India, saying, you know, this company has won or that company has won. It's actually very dangerous, right? It's sort of like saying you take a cricket series, a 5-test series, okay? And you try to call the series on the first match. First match, third day, one team is winning, and you say, you know what, we're going to call this test. Really bad idea, because first test has to finish, you've got to play the second test, you've got to play the third test. And by the way, these are all world-class teams. You know, it's not like Aussies playing Cambodia. That's not the game. You know, Aussies are playing the Indians. And it's T20. You know, so it's not, so it's very early, right? And my view is, look, I mean, these markets are going to be 10, 50 times bigger over the next 10, 15 years, right? So it's very early in the game.
Yeah, hi. Just a couple of questions. One is in terms of, you spoke about e-com and digital advertising being the largest, in a way, markets for online anywhere in the world. So while we tend to see that with Google searches, we have some listings of e-com guys who fulfill on certain transactions, etc. While we see those product listings on Google search, are we in India going to look at a pure play kind of transactional platform from Google coming about? Because in India is perhaps a more nascent e-com market, as you put it up front. So how do we?
I think it's a good question. Look, we're in the discovery. We want to help consumers discover, get answers to what they want to do. We're not in the fulfillment business, right? So, short answer is no. I mean, you know, we have Flipkart and Amazon and Snapdeal and all of them that we've got lots of companies trying to make e-commerce happen in India, right? So our focus and my focus in India really is how do we get the next billion consumers online, right? It's very squarely around affordable devices, local languages, connectivity. How do we make the internet much more useful, right? How do we get rural people connected? That's sort of where we're going, as opposed to like doing something else. We want to make the search experience, which is the discovery experience, much better, right? So if you look at Google Assistant, right? So if you look at like the evolution of search, you went from blue links to one boxes to knowledge panels to now the assistant, right? Where you should be able to talk to your assistant and the assistant should be able to do stuff for you. But actually, who does the transaction and the fulfillment, all of that, those are partners.
Sure. And secondly, in terms of, if we look at the device market as such, so Google in the past has been in and out in a way. So, and even now as we look at in terms of Pixel as such, so it's more focused on the high-end kind of in terms of market space, while your ambition is to connect people with affordable devices. So can we expect perhaps in India a device from you guys coming about which is more affordable to the masses, not perhaps in the same brand, but obviously in some other brand or something of those sorts? So that is one question on the devices. And secondly, how do you see this in terms of the Android market versus Google itself being a device company? Because in the past, obviously, there have been concerns around conflict of interest with the other device companies. So how do you see these two things?
Yeah, good question. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, look, we're very clear. It's about Android, right? Android is open. Android is everywhere. And if you look at what does it take to really get 1 billion Indians online, let's just focus on India for a minute. I mean, basically, we've got to have devices. The ecosystem needs to build devices that are 3,000 rupees, 2,500, 2,000 rupees, keep going down, right? We are not going to do that. Because, that's you have to be like hardcore hardware company with, all kinds of scale, right? If you look at what by the way, if you look at what we did in India with Android 1 2 years ago, right? 2 years ago, you could not find a 6,000 rupee high quality smartphone, right? So Android 1 was basically an initiative that we had where we spec'd the hardware, it was made by other OEMs, and we kind of triggered and stimulated that market. And then we said, look, now we can find a 6,000, there are many brands at 6,000 rupees, very high quality, we don't need to do that, right? So now we're actually taking Android 1, elsewhere. If you look at, now what we're trying to do with Pixel, we had with Nexus and now with Pixel, is we want to really set the reference. What does an amazing Android phone look like, right? So you'll see us do stuff like that, which is where we're trying to, go after, set a reference design, pick a market, show what Android can do, right? But we're very clear as a company that it's about Android. It's open. It's everywhere, right? So and in India, it's very, very important. And we don't plan to build those phones at the low end, right? I mean, that's not the business that we're in. There's a question. Yeah.
Hi. To start with, India appeared like a very Google-friendly market. As user behavior matures and as new non-English users have come into the system, do you think India is a less Google-friendly market?
Yeah, look, I think, I don't know. We'll have to find out and see whether, but look, what I can tell you is, see, we've been very focused, right, on tailoring our products for the next 100 million, the next 200 million, the next 300 million. So I'll give you some of the things we've done, right? For instance, if search didn't work very well in voice, Hindi voice, then it'd be very challenging because my view is voice, especially, I mean, the reason voice is not huge today in India, I don't mean speaking in voice, I mean internet access through voice, right? Voice recognition. The reason has been bandwidth because voice consumes a lot of bandwidth and we've been bandwidth constraints. But as broadband begins to scale, voice becomes very, very important, right? You're being able to talk to your internet. So we have to make sure that we solve voice in all languages. In Android, we have to make sure that all our products work very well in voice, right? So voice, local languages, right? We have to make sure that all our products work in local languages. Third is, if you look at offline, right? Even, let's say next year we get to 100 million 4G users, 200 million 3G users. The reality is there'll still be a large number of users who will be on, somewhat slower networks, who are going to find even 50 rupees a month or 50 rupees a GB very expensive, right? So offline becomes very important. So we took YouTube offline in India, and it was the most successful product that we've ever launched in India, YouTube offline. I don't know how many of you tried YouTube offline. You could pick the videos you want, you offline them, you can watch them for 48 hours, right? Then we took Maps offline. Boom, curve change, right? Then we took Chrome offline. So, you can actually pick the pages you want to look at, you can take them offline, you can watch them offline. Boom, right, curves. So I think what's important for companies, whether it's Google or other companies like us, is we have to constantly understand the needs of these next generation of users, right? And we have to adapt our products and sometimes radically change our products. So I'll give you another example. We announced a product called YouTube Go. It's an app, it's a new YouTube video app that is entirely designed for a market like India, right? So we start by saying it's offline first. So when you actually get the app, you'll already have, a bunch of videos in it. Then, every time before you watch a video, it'll tell you how much data you're going to consume, etc. It does sharing. I can share videos with you without having internet connections, right? So, what's very important for us is we have to constantly understand, the needs of these users. We have to adapt those products. We have to adapt our products, and then you'll also see us launching new products to meet the needs of these sets of users. So if we don't change, you're absolutely right. But hopefully what we're trying to do is, and we're very committed to doing, is deeply understanding these sets of users, right? So 3 years ago, I had predicted that India is going to be the world's first offline internet. meaning users will spend more time offline on their apps than online. It's already happened, right? So my next prediction is over the next 3 years, we are going to be the world's largest voice-driven internet by far. It's going to happen because, you know, we like to speak more than type. We also have about 400 million people who are illiterate, so they can't type even if they wanted to, right? So for a whole set of reasons, these are the kind of mega things you have to catch early.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a question here.
Hi. Not that I'm aware of the financials of Google India, but...
So can you speak up a little louder?
Not that I'm aware of the financials of Google India, but I think some of the efforts that you've just outlined is way disproportional, at least even by your own admission, to at least the near-term financial opportunities that you can tap, right? So what's really driving Google India to put in so much of effort, at least in the near to medium term, for an opportunity that might not be as vast?
Yeah, look, you know, opportunity, as I said, right? So in an internet business, you need, most important thing is you need to have a large number of users, right? And then your level of monetization really is a function of how much disposable income they have, because disposable income they have determines what they buy, determines the size of the ad market, and so on and so forth, right? So our view is very simple, right? If you don't get the users online, and if you don't win the users, then you'll never be able to have a very large business. So our view is very simple. We're going to focus on that first, right? And that will happen as we go. And by the way, I mean, we have a pretty decent sized business here, right? For Indian standards, it's actually quite large. But the trajectory change is a few years out, right? Because it's going to be tied to this income per capita. See, in our kind of business, what you can't do, I mean, it's probably different in other businesses, right? See, if you show up when it's happening, let's say when monetization really inflects, it's too late. It's game over, right? You're not even going to play. So you look at YouTube, for instance, right? YouTube, we bought YouTube, I guess, about 10 years ago. Today, it's a very large business globally, right? But if we hadn't been in video 10 years ago and invested for many years, YouTube wouldn't be YouTube. Same thing with Android, right? Android now has a very large number of users and so on. But if we weren't in Android and we hadn't been building Android for a long period of time, we won't be there. As you know, in investing, you all say, right? Timing is everything. Same in our business. You have to be there at the right time. And the right time is not when actually it happens. Because by the time it happens, it's too late. There was a question up here, and then, yeah, there's two more. Let's just take two more and then...
Hi, just a question on the 100 million DAUs. How differently do they behave than if you picked a sample of 100 million in the US or in China or wherever else? What do they do differently in India?
100 million daily active users are very similar to any user in China or any user in the US. They consume massive amounts of data. If you combine mobile data, Wi-Fi, I guess the one difference would be they spend a lot of time offline, because they tend to be very kind of value conscious. They search a lot, they consume a lot of video, they're on social, they're massively on messaging. About half of them transact, which is the 50 million buyers we have for e-commerce. About half of them pretty much transact. I think probably maybe the one thing that is different is they don't buy as much yet, because I think it's a new behavior. But they continue to buy, right? The 50 million will buy a lot more, and then the others will start buying. I think the real difference when you look at the user comes when you look at beyond the 200 million, right? This occasional internet user. And I think there it's very different, right? They can't afford, so they're infrequent usage, almost entirely local language. They prefer lean back experiences a lot more than lean forward experiences, right? Content consumption and so on and so forth. So I think the real difference we've started observing is, let's say, the 200 to 350. And then when we look beyond the 300 million, it's radically different. Because that is where, you have to show that the internet is going to make them money tomorrow. Right? How much money am I going to make because I'm on the internet? It's not about entertainment. It's not about, it's not a nice to have. It's a you have to show them criticality. And if you can show them criticality, then they'll get online. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned about cloud business. If you can elaborate further, what focus you have for SME, given that they have very poor infrastructure, the IT infrastructure on the IT side. So, what you are going to do on the SME side in India?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we have several 100,000 small businesses in India that use Google Cloud products, and it's growing like crazy, right? So look, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, the great thing about the cloud is, you know, it's on the cloud, so you don't have to buy stuff. It's on demand. You can pay as you go. So we are, you know, we are working on things like pricing. We're trying to localize some of our products so that it's even more relevant. But to me, I mean, that's just going to happen, right? It's like in GDP per capita. I mean, it'll grow rapidly over a long period of time. So it's happening in India. I mean, a lot of people. I mean, India is already a cloud-first market when it comes to IT, right? Not from the big companies, but if you look at sort of large scale, it's massive growth in. I mean, like, there's literally millions of SMBs in India that already use cloud, right? And they don't realize, they don't know what cloud is, but they're using Gmail, they're using Docs, you know, etc. On that. Now, if you're talking about, you know, AWS, you know, Google Cloud, you know, big data, BigQuery, those kinds of things, I think it's still early, but that'll also pick up. Yeah, let's take one last question. We should wrap up. Yeah, back there.
Yeah, hi. So, you know, I think India probably would be a wireless broadband market versus the West, which has also been a wireline broadband market. So do you think the consumer behavior out here will be quite different and hence the monetization?
No, I mean, look, I think, I mean, the consumer behavior on mobile, right, is somewhat different. But at the end of the day, it's about time spent, right? So for instance, it's hard to do messaging on a desktop. I suppose you could. That was called email, right? I mean, the mobile version of communication was messaging. So yes, the products are different, you know, etc. But I don't think India is going to be a large desktop market. Right? I'll give you a very interesting statistic, right? I moved to India 11 years ago to build Dell in India, and you know, when I moved, the total addressable market for PC shipments was 9.5 million. Okay, that was 2005. Here we are in 2016. What do you think the total addressable market for PCs and laptops is this year? 9.5 million units, okay, was the TAM for desktops and laptops 11 years ago in India. What do you think it is this year? Any guesses? Huh? 15? Remember, smartphones 5 years ago were 10 million, now 200 million, huh? 10.5. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. So I do think, look, this is going to be a mobile market. I do think, though, I don't know how many of you know this, but the regulators are working on a new thing that will help. I mean, the whole issue with fiber, right, has been, you know, the difficulty of right-of-way. So they're working on a new right-of-way act. So if that passes, I think, I mean, there are 260 million households in India, right? I don't think all of them will get fiber, but let's imagine in India, even with 50 million households with fiber, that can dramatically change, right? 200 million people, 50 million households can get fiber. So I'm actually quite optimistic about fiber to the home if you take a 5 to 7 year horizon. But that again, right, is 50 million households. So for all of India, you're absolutely right. It's going to be mobile broadband. I'm also, I mean, look, as a company, we're betting that Wi-Fi is going to be huge here. I think in many ways, we're going to have a Wi-Fi ecosystem that no other country in the world has seen. Not because it's cool, because we have to. Right? That's the only way to deliver sort of the last mile at scale in India.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. Great to spend time with you. Free IPO shares.